coming up with a new tool stack comes really ultimately should be driven by what does the client need. And if you go back to 1984, computer users didn't know that they wanted a graphical user interface until Steve Jobs introduced it through the Lisa and the Mac. 15 years ago or whatever, when the iPhone came out, people didn't know that they wanted a phone that could take pictures and video and surf the internet and do email and all those things. There were some point solutions like Blackberries that did email and some other things, but nobody knew that they wanted a super integrated device like that until somebody invented it. Apple invented that and presented it, and now that's what everybody pretty much uses. Our job is to understand better what they need than what they know what they need, and then to come to them with those solutions.
It's like, how many clients at the SMB level are going to come to you and say, I want DNS filtering services? I heard somebody snicker because it's like, that's one that you understand you sort of need to have.
At the end of the day, every MSP can get any tool out there and pay whatever they want. So you need to look at what your team can use. If this one works for you, and if it's a little bit more, if it's $3 a seat instead of $2, but your team does better with it, you're going to save that money on the back end because of the labor cost.
Hello, my name is Colleen Frye, and I'm the Executive Editor for MSP Success. And I'm so excited today to bring you another roundtable discussion. Our topic today is selecting and building the right tool stack to grow your business. So managed service providers are constantly trying to be better, to stay ahead of the competition, and to meet current and emerging client needs. We know that you're always on the lookout for tools that can help you do just that. But at the end of the day, you have to make money too. Our panelists for this roundtable are going to share how they avoid the shiny new object syndrome that leads to tool sprawl, and how they build a stack that serves their business as well as their clients. So before we dive in, I want to introduce our guests. First, I want to introduce Matt Rose, who is the co-founder and Chief Experience Officer of TechRage IT. Hey, Matt, say hello and tell us a little bit about yourself and your company.
Yeah, hey, Colleen. So, Matt Rose with TechRage IT. We're in the Orlando, Florida area. We've had an MSP that's been in business since about 2015 doing IT, but really got into MSP type world in the 2018 timeframe, and just a growing MSP, about a dozen employees right now, and on a nice growth trajectory.
Great. Thanks for being with us today. And next up is Roman Trega, who's the Chief Technology Officer of Click Solutions. Roman, say hi and tell us about you and your company.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Colleen. So I'm Roman Trega, I'm CTO of Click, as you mentioned. So Click Solutions, we're headquartered in Baltimore, Maryland. We also have locations in Florida, Miami, Florida, as well as Austin, Texas. In addition to that, we serve really clients all throughout the U.S., but those are really geographically our primary areas. We specialize in managed IT services as well as managed security services, really.
Great. Thanks for being with us today. And Ole Thordarson, who is the founder, president, and CEO of Alvaca. Say hello to us and tell us about you.
Yeah, so Alvaca is a company that has two primary revenue streams. And the first one is fairly traditional managed IT services, but targeting the mid-market. So we don't have an all-you-can-eat offering. We have more of an a la carte that in co-managed IT, where the IT departments and the client can select from the services that we provide that they think that they need. The other part of the business is really rapidly growing. That's our ransomware recovery business. And we got into that in January of 2020. And it's really taken off. And we've been able to get paneled with most of the insurers and build relationships with the breach counsel lawyers and all sorts of other people in the ecosystem.
Great. Well, thank you all for joining us. And so, as you can see from this introduction, the beauty of this roundtable is that you all come from different size companies and service markets, but you do all have to pick or approve the tools. And so I wanted to start with taking a look at criteria, and then we'll move on to, the process that you use. So let's start with when you're looking to add or replace your tool, what are some items on your checklist, Matt?
So I think one of the bigger things we've run into in the past is if we're going to add a tool, it's certainly about client need, but even from a standpoint of replacing, what we need to understand is, are the competitors out there going to do something our clients need, or is it giving us frivolous features that we may never need? So that's one thing. We also want to be more of a complete MSP. So there's times when we're looking at a new tool that we have to look for a feature or something like that is going to help us there and help us do more of a job. We are big on employee efficiency as well. So I want something that's going to help them actually do less work or do work quicker. But the other thing that we've run into, unfortunately, from a standpoint is that we've also, I, as one of the founders of the company, have bought a tool and then we basically sat on it for 6 months because we didn't have the time to deploy it. And we just, even though we just 6 months of paying for something we never used, and therefore, what good is it doing us at that point?
Mm-hmm. Roman, what's on your checklist when you are searching for a tool?
Well, Matt really hit on a lot of them. Ultimately, is it going to do what we need it to do? Is it going to provide the contractual services or the services that we're contractually obligated to provide? Is it going to do a better job than what? And as you mentioned, are there efficiencies along the way? But Matt, so we've been around since 2012. We've definitely, one of the things I've learned is what's the work to get there along the way as well. And do we have the resources and the capacity? Are people tied up? Do we have projects booked up? And how does it fit into our bundle? I think you touched on it where you're trying to become more of a complete MSP. We all are, and so there's always that one feature that we're looking for. Potentially we may have a client that needs it, but it sounds like something good that would fit within the stack. But how else does it fit into the stack? So it all goes into it, Colleen.
Mm-hmm. Same for you, Oli, or do you have some other criteria that are on your list?
Yeah, so, Matt and Roman really touch on some important points. I'll add that we're also, looking for the quality, the outcome, and the consistency of the service delivery of the tool. And quality really comes from consistency. So we need a tool that is working well, that can be automated quite a bit, because automations promote consistency of the outcome. And ultimately, the client will measure whether your service is a quality or not by how consistently it produces the outcomes that they're expecting. If it produces the outcomes they're expecting, they figure you're a good outfit. And then for us, cost is a secondary consideration. Again, because we tend to deliver point solutions to the mid-market. We started out SMB, and we've been moving more, for the last number of years into the mid-market. I would say we're solidly in the mid-market. We're not doing SMB work anymore. And so we have to have solutions that not only meet the needs of the mid-market and really are attractive to the needs of an IT department and their management. But it, like I said before, it better work because they are very critical buyers. The SMB doesn't necessarily know when something isn't going quite right. But people that work in IT that are evaluating and measuring what we're doing know whether we're screwing up or not.
Mm-hmm. So nobody's mentioned the vendor or the vendor relationship or the tech support or the partner program. Can you guys talk about that? Is that something that means something to you? Is that something you examine? Jump in, talk to each other.
Oh, most definitely. For me, it's one of those things that it's sort of a prerequisite. It's, just to get to the conversation. Who is this? Is there a name behind this? Who owns them? And all of that fun stuff. There's a lot. And then once you get into that landscape, there's other questions because, account management, I'm sure Matt and Ollie have a similar thought on this.
Yeah, I would say that it's certainly, I think it also goes to when you're looking at potentially replacing a tool, something you may have, an RMM, which everybody's had for years. There's a lot of big name players out there that you can get your peers to tell you about them, and you can get a pretty good feel for what their tech support is and their account management. And we know sometimes people have a bad experience, someone else has a good one, but that makes it easy. But it's also when you're trying to add a tool like something, that's when it's difficult. Because sometimes the new tools that are out there are new vendors, new worlds, and you kind of need to jump off the deep end. So that makes it tough, but it definitely is important, and it depends what you're doing it. But it also makes it if there's a new player in the RMM world, you really have to think of that closely. If it's a tool that's baked into your stack already, will this work?
Mm-hmm. What about partner programs? Oli, does that make a difference to you? I mean, I was at ChannelCon recently, and they were talking about how used to be more important, but now MSPs are not involved in as many partner programs as they used to be. I mean, is that something you look at?
Well, we have gotten more selective, kind of in that EOS, that planning methodology that a lot of MSPs are following these days. We're following the less is more philosophy. We in the past have tended to, and we still tend to want to bite off more than we can actually process. To Matt's point about going to a show and buying a tool and coming back, and you just don't have the bandwidth to implement it. That's a common ailment, I think, throughout the MSP world. So, yeah, we've gotten much more selective about the services that we're providing our clients, and therefore the vendors that we're contracting with to licensed technologies and whatnot. And I wanted to add on support from a vendor, it's kind of an extreme example, but the whole CrowdStrike thing from a few weeks back, you better make sure that you've got good vendor support and vendor relations when something doesn't go right. Are they going to be there to back you up? And will they have the tech support and the solutions that you need when there are problems? And, that's pretty extreme. But on a more minor level, we get bad releases, that things that don't work, or there are outages from some of the vendors where there's some online component to the service. And you want to know that they've got good infrastructure of their own in place, that they've got good tech support, that they've got good software development and rollout processes. And then the channel relationship that they've got good pricing for us, and that they're not cutting deals down the street with somebody with vastly more competitive terms or whatever. On all levels, from account management to tech support to the financial and operational strength and practices of the organization, all need to come into account when you're looking at a potential partner.
I saw both of you guys nodding. You want to add to anything there?
Go ahead, Matt.
Well, I was going to say, just to go back to the partner program question, Colleen, I don't even know what the partner program really means to traditional. Like if it's MDF, I feel like there's MDF is to me what I would hope for from a partner kind of thing. Cause I know everyone gives you like you can co-brand the materials and everything. And I don't know if that's done as much with co-branding marketing for a backup product or whatever. We don't do a whole lot of it. From partner program, we're just looking more that they're going to actually, take our call and do best by our business and theirs, and realize that if we grow, they grow. So I don't know if so I'm not sure what what really is considered partner, but that's where I'll say on that. I don't know if it's important to me. I just really want the overall company to support our mission.
Roman?
I think I first started nodding when Oli mentioned coming back from a conference with new tools to implement. Those are always fun. It's like Christmas morning, isn't it? No, all jokes aside, as far as the partner program, it becomes relevant again to a certain extent. It really depends. When I think of our stack, right, Oli, you had mentioned mid-level businesses, small enterprise. When I think of our stack, this really is the tools that are used to deliver for, again, that SMB realm and really the managed IT service component of it. For that stack, the partner program does matter. You want a company that absolutely understands the needs for multi-tenancy. Sometimes you'll have managed clients that are co-managed. Do they get access? That absolutely is. Matt, I actually learned what MDFs were like a year ago. My CEO, who obviously runs our sales team, when I mentioned, I said, yeah, our rep said something about MDF. He's like, oh yeah, that's great. So for me, it was always a matter of that. A lot of the times for, again, some of those staff partner companies, it was what was the churn on the account managers? Because you also understand the human element. People will move, people will get promoted. There's a life cycle to these things, and you want to see stability. Ollie, you had mentioned consistency and stability. That for me has, I would say, been a huge, huge part, or at least something I can correlate. I don't know how scientifically, maybe not so much a KPI, but I can definitely, feel the difference when there's a consistency within the partner team. Much less having a partner program and understanding those needs, just the consistency there.
Mm-hmm. So once you've decided you want a tool, or you think you found a tool that you like, or maybe you're searching for something, I'd like to know, how you vet it. I said, okay, I think this is going to work, but now we got to vet it. And I'm going to ask each of you to kind of share some bullet points from your vetting process. Ole, you want to start?
Yeah. So for us, we go through a fairly rigorous proof of concept on testing the solution and building it to what it's going to need to look like to be delivered to the client. But in addition to that, we're looking at the return on investment. How much of this, how much uptake are we going to get on this in terms of units and unit sales? What customers are going to buy it? How much are they going to pay for it? What's it going to cost us? As a general rule, I'm looking to make about a 75% gross margin on our recurring managed services. That means that I've got maybe, 10 or 15%. I need to be under 10 or 15% on licensing costs that might be involved, and our human resource costs. We break out in our network operations center where all these services are delivered. We break out how much time is spent by the staff in that group to each category of service that we have. So granularly, I can look, kind of have an income statement, essentially an income statement that shows the revenue for each solution we're providing, what our cost is in terms of staffing costs, licensing costs. We even break out, internet bandwidth and real estate costs in the NOC. So it's a very granular breakout of what it takes to deliver that solution. And, so we're looking at, what are we going to make? How much can we sell in the first year, the second year? And, and essentially it comes down to an ROI exercise.
Mm-hmm. So you're nodding, Matt. What's your vetting process?
So, I think what Ollie said is that's a lot of awesome stuff. We do a lot of tracking of our price as well. But what we look more than anything is we look at a proof of concept, again, especially if it's a replacement tool. You can do some level of proof of concept with almost anything, and kind of want to beat it up a little bit. Again, the easiest example, because everyone seems to have one, is the RMM. You can get it, you can get a demo, you can get some free months or something of that nature. You really want to look into what are the primary functions you're doing with that tool. And that, again, goes through every tool you have. You should have things that if you lose them, your business changes. If you add them, might be great. You want to get how they work. And that works for these large vendors. And we want to do that before the price. And, I mentioned earlier how sometimes it's hard with a vendor if they're kind of new. But the other advantage to a new vendor or a new product is they're typically anxious to get the product out there, and they're going to give you a little more time to look under the hood if you can find the time. We work with a lot of early adopting products, and they're much more relaxed about, hey, take some time, beat it up a little bit, because we're just helping them go to market. So, but we really want to make sure it's actually going to work to the best of our ability before we even care or really get too far into the pricing discussion.
So what about you, Roman? What is your vetting process, or some bullet points of your vetting process when you're looking at different tools?
Well, our process is actually somewhere in the middle. Matt made a good point that we sort of get to the numbers when we get to the numbers. And I think that comes part of in our case, it was always that way, because part of it is our process always started at figuring out the champion. So if this is changing an existing item in the stack, who's using it? If it's a SOC item, we have to talk to the team. Who's the champion within it? And then at that point, the process usually, we're a little more formal about it. We want them to look at it, look at 3 or at least 2 other competitors at that point, and then we assess it. A lot of what we do, just from an overall governance standpoint, we do as a team. So a lot of it is delegating the power to the appropriate people. And so that process starts there. In terms of the numbers, yeah, absolutely. Eventually, if there's somebody that's pounding my table saying, I want that tool, quite frankly, this is where I still have to be relevant in the company and figure out the numbers. That's really a whole nother element in the process where that's where the partner program comes in. That's where the account management comes in because, it's all relevant, but you always have to start with the people that are using it and the champions in our world, at least.
Oli, do you vet those tools?
Yeah.
What, Oli?
I was going to say, I wanted to Matt and Roman, how do you determine what kind of, when you want to add a service? I mean, is that driven by the customer and they're clearly articulating to you needs that aren't being fulfilled? Or do clients just not even, especially in the SMB space, not know well enough what they need? And it's kind of really your job that you understand better what they need than they do. And you have to then build it and provide it and educate them that this is something that they need to do.
Usually that's the case. It's our job. It's our job to know what needs to be done. And I mentioned champions. My team is very explicit and very specific that the tools that we have, they want to ensure that, that it gives the best possible result. So again, if we're using the security element as our example, ultimately, will it deliver it at minimum, but will it also make it better and all of those other items? So the other side of this is the market. So some of this is, some of these tools, if we really get into the grand, it's like, how many clients at the SMB level are going to come to you and say, I want DNS filtering services? I heard somebody snicker because it's like, that's one that you understand you sort of need to have within certain compliance areas, especially that's just sort of going to have to be there. And I don't want to have my solutions engineers, for example, my solutions architects, TAMs, whatever variation of phrasing we're going to use here in the role, to spend their time trying to sell what may potentially be like $1.99 per endpoint. And I'm just throwing numbers around when in reality, it just needs to be there. We treat ransomware. I know you mentioned ransomware recovery on your end. We spend a lot, quite frankly, on the ransomware protection specifically, just to make sure, because I could sit there and I could argue the value, but ultimately, in terms of our bottom line, it's better for it to be there. It's safer, and it's our own due diligence. So I know it's a long answer, but that's a bit of it.
I see you nodding, Matt. You have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely for the most part, we have to educate on, the security products that they're never going to really understand or care. We have to just kind of educate why and figure out how it fits, whether you're kind of taking on the cost of it because it's a must for your business. There's other things that I think when you have kind of a quarterly review with the client, you need to hear what they're talking about. And then sometimes you don't even know a product exists until you see it. That a lot of the newer tools, like the RPA world or whatever, sometimes you didn't know that you needed it till you hear about it and then you see a product. So there's other times when you can hear what they could use or what could make your life easier. And that's when sometimes these shows, when you go to that's when you find interesting, another RMM vendor, oh, this one does this, and you can fit it into where your client might use it, or you might be more valuable to your client.
Mm-hmm. So Matt, I'm going to stick with you for a minute. I know that you had mentioned sort of replacing a tool earlier in the discussion, and that's got to be a whole different ball of wax when you're making a decision. So what goes into deciding if, I'm going to rip this thing out and start new with something else? What goes into that?
I think it can be a lot of different factors. As much as price, I think a few of us have said that price isn't always the determining factor, but sometimes a vendor might keep raising price and now you're kind of like, all right, well, now you're going to force me to go look. So that can be part of it. But I think the bigger thing is looking at going back to the support. I think support's a big one. What if you started with a product years ago, support was great, and there's PE there, just like there's PE in the MSP world, there's PE in the vendor world. They get bought. Now the support gets bad. The tech you like, the account manager you liked is gone. And you might have to switch because you just frankly aren't feeling like you're loved or you're getting the support you want anymore. Or just, again, you might look at product and what it's doing. We've had times we've ripped out products because they're too complicated for the techs, because as we train, it's almost like, well, I shouldn't really need to have a degree to run this tool. And other times it's because we've had them for a while and they don't seem to be catching up to the rest of the market for their tool. And so we need to see, again, what we can do. So we have to really make a consideration of, is the pain worth it? Because if you replace a tool that is built into your business, specific ones, some of them you could switch and nobody would really notice. No client would notice. You could probably go through a list of all the different tools. Some are not that big a deal. RMMs, backups, things like that. You make a bad choice, you do a bad implementation, you'll lose customers. Worse, you know what I mean? I think backup is almost right now to me harder than RMM. RMM, there's a lot of ways you can make it less painful than even a year or two ago. But we constantly look at backup solutions, and then you're like, all right, this one's a little cheaper, but we know this one.
Thanks, Matt. How about you, Oli? Do you have any, specific metrics or pain versus gain things you do when you're deciding if you're going to replace a product?
Yeah. So earlier I mentioned about, what kind of gross margins we're looking to make on a managed service when we're providing it. And, the tool costs and the human resource costs and the other direct related costs all add up to our cost of goods sold on it. But that doesn't mean anything unless we know how much we can sell it for. And for that, I am a big believer in value-based pricing. How much pain is the client experiencing, and how much are they able to pay to resolve that pain? So rather than base my price on cost, I'm going to do it more on what kind of value it provides to the client, what they perceive as the value. And that can get short-circuited if the client feels like that they can provide the solution for a lot cheaper themselves by building it and owning themselves. So somewhere between what the client can build it and run it for themselves and what the pain cost is to them is our sweet spot in pricing. And some things are hard for a client to build and provide to themselves. A staffed 24-hour network operations center, that's actually staffed by personnel monitoring 24/7. We go after what I call the always-on businesses, the nonstop businesses of the 21st century here. And for them, most companies are not going to build and staff a 24-hour NOC to support their 24-hour operations. So for that, we have more pricing leverage to based on what it's going to cost them to build that for themselves. On some other things like email hygiene or even backup, you have to look at what's our cost, what is it going to cost them to provide that service for themselves, and somewhere in that area is how we come up with our strike price for what we're going to charge the client.
And for you, Roman, do you have any sort of metrics you use when you're going to decide, is the pain of ripping this one out worth the gain of putting the new one in?
Yeah, it's interesting though how much our metrics have evolved over the years as far as what we're looking at. Interestingly, a lot of the metrics that I started looking at are CRM opportunities. Specifically, if we're losing certain opportunities, what are the reasons? Is it something that's missing? And what are those percentages? How does that break down? Is it because our price is too high, for example? Are we, Oli, you mentioned the whole always on component. Part of that is, reasoning. Some people say, oh, well, I don't need 24/7. And so, the same sort of concept flows in there. So in terms of metrics, a part of it also has to do with what is the human cost associated, obviously. And so that a lot of people need to make sure that they keep those metrics in mind as far as when you're adding a tool, yes, obviously we've all talked about the fact that we're probably notorious as tech guys for buying toys and then not thinking through on the deployment cost. Obviously there's that, but there's always the underlying elements. If you're taking your revenue generating staff away, how long, all that. But really, I think, a lot of what we're talking about is conceptual. I love to create calculators here internally and show my CEO, like, look what I could do here. But what I've really learned is a lot of that data is in the one loss and the reasons for it, because that's the real wild out there. And oftentimes that disconnect of sales and ops, and you sort of get the real picture.
Mm-hmm. So I want to kind of stay on this cost and opportunity kind of discussion, and let's talk about innovation versus making money. So, we haven't talked much about margin yet and cost of goods sold. Should that kind of math drive all your tool decisions, and why or why not? So let me start with you, Matt.
Definitely not. It shouldn't drive the conversation. It's obviously a piece of it, but we're in a world as MSPs that at the end of the day, every MSP can get any tool out there and pay whatever they want. So you need to look at what your team can use. Kind of goes back to, if this one works for you, and if it's a little bit more, if it's $3 a seat instead of $2, but your team does better with it, you're going to save that money on the back end because of the labor cost. At the same time, I think everyone has their favorite and their least favorite vendors, and it's great to have a great account manager, but also you do have to constantly be looking at to make sure, again, that they're not kind of taking that for granted, that they have this huge fan club of people that love them and they just keep raising their rates by 15% every year. Because at some point, if they're not actually improving the product 15% and the market is changing, people are going to go at least kick the tires. So you have to have it be part of it, but I don't think you can make it all of it. And then there's, again, some of the newer tools out there. We don't really have the cost has to be there, but there's nothing to put it against. You have to just decide, can you charge your clients more? And but it should really drive innovation and how well your company should work. And the cost needs to be a huge factor. You need to make sure you can actually afford it, but it shouldn't drive it. Just don't go to the cheapest tool or the most expensive for that matter. It's not always the best, in my opinion.
How about you, Oli? Where does innovation versus cost kind of factor in for you? I saw you nodding.
I get ideas all the time about things that I think would be a cool service or a cool solution to a problem that a client has. And you go to conferences and I see new tools. I think, wow, that could really be used innovatively to solve some sort of client problem. But you have to measure it against, does the client perceive it as a problem? And maybe it's a problem for the client and they don't understand that it's a problem. And then you got a lot of education and evangelizing to do. And that's an expensive sales process to educate a client. It's slow, it's expensive, it's tedious. So a lot of ideas that I've had that I think are good and would solve problems, if the client doesn't perceive it enough as a pain, you're just beating your head against the wall trying to convince them of it. So you got to make sure, any solution you come up with, you better make sure that you have good marketing messaging and good sales strategy in place, and that you can deliver a message to the client and that they recognize that a problem is getting solved and a pain is getting solved. And that comes down to, is it going to make their business better, faster, cheaper, or improve their gross margins, improve their operational maturity in their operations? You got to be able to point to some benefit to them, or you're just wasting your time trying to onboard, innovate a new product and go deliver it to the client.
Roman, cost of goods sold, does that take precedence over innovation and maybe your boss?
Oh, it's somewhere there. It's the way that I would say it is, it's not going to not be in the conversation by any stretch of the imagination. Either you start with that, and so to me, I'm sort of blessed to have a really awesome CEO, but you also have to treat it just like you would a client. It's the same exact concept. Listen, I'll give you a prime example for us, cost of goods sold versus innovation. We, a long time ago, went heavy in pushing out advanced AV ransomware protection in our core stack a long time ago. And a lot of other MSPs were charging for that. There was a base stack, there was this, there was that. And my argument to it is, even if, for example, we are billing our client for the security incident response, you're still pulling away a vast amount of people from what they're doing and the operational integrity. So I will say this, as CTOs and ultimately, CEOs, depending on how an MSP is structured, it absolutely has to be somewhere in the conversation. If you start your conversation at ROI and everything else, a lot of the other stuff we talked about comes in. Is it a known vendor? Is it a known product? Is it stable? Is it all these other things where you'll save a bunch of money and you'll be able to aggregate certain things? But at the same time, if that's what you start with, I wouldn't say it's always going to lead you down the road. But you can't sort of disregard it either. I think a lot of small businesses, ourselves included in the early days, we were purely focused on the innovation side of it. And the truth is you measure it. You have to measure your risk and everything else along. So yeah, it's hard to give a black and white answer. It's always somewhere in between. Right.
Well, it's a very nuanced subject. And so we're just about out of time. But before I let you all go, I'd like you to share, some good parting advice with our audience for when they're making decisions about their tool stack. And either it can be a tip or how to avoid a mistake you made, something you learned along the way that you'd like them to have to not go through. So I think I will start with Oli this time.
Coming up with a new tool stack ultimately should be driven by what does the client need? What does your particular client need? Not any clients, but the clients that you're serving. And if you go back to 1984, computer users didn't know that they wanted a graphical user interface until Steve Jobs introduced it through the Lisa and the Mac. And then, 15 years ago or whatever, when the iPhone came out, people didn't know that they wanted a phone that could take pictures and video and surf the internet and, do email and all those things. There were some point solutions like BlackBerries that did email and some other things, but nobody knew that they wanted a super integrated device like that until somebody invented it. Apple invented that and presented it, and now that's the standard, whether it's on an Android platform or an iPhone platform. That's what everybody pretty much uses. So our job as good stewards of our clients is to understand better what they need than what they know what they need, and then to come to them with those solutions. And so that would be my parting. I'll just call it at that. Let's focus on the understanding the needs of our clients better than they understand them and go deliver that.
All right. So if I understand you right, it's start with the client, then the tool. All right. How about you, Matt? Words of advice for building your stack or some mistake to avoid that you've learned from?
Yeah, I think the first one, and it's tempting, is to you go to a conference and there's always a show special. Unless you've been kicking the tires on something for a long time where you actually are ready. There's been times like there's a tool I want to buy and I know there's a conference coming up and I'm just like, I'm going to take the show special because it's time and I'm ready. All the other stuff's gone through. But and vendors probably hate that I say this, half the time they still want your business 3-4 months later and they'll do something for you. And even if they can't, again, it goes back to wasting that tool. Like, again, there's specifically at least one I can think of because it still gives me heartburn that we had for 6-7 months and didn't touch. Yeah, we got a show special, however much you're paying per month. So that show special was wasted. So even if the show special, think about how quickly you can do it. Because if it's $100 off a month, you're not going to do it for 3 months. What does that help you? And then I think you also have to remember that sometimes, you're going to pay blank, but then there's both an onboarding cost and there's the onboarding time. And the cost sometimes comes in like, oh yeah, you're going to get it for $1 an endpoint. oh, but the onboarding is $1,000 and you have to do it. So there's that too. You have to make sure you're taking everything into account.
Mm-hmm. And Roman, I'm going to give you the last word. What's your best advice for an MSP that's building their stack?
All very good advice, and definitely all things to take into consideration. Really, the biggest advice and the most important thing is own your data. So regardless of what system, what tool, whatever it is that you're implementing, migrating to, switching out, define. So if we're talking a PSA, what is your data? Define it. What do you need? What are the requirements? Where does it live? What is required for the other workflows? And so an RMN, same concept. Own your data, make sure you have it documented. In that case, it's more so workflows. Make sure you have that documented as well, because the more you have that data hygiene and sort of operational hygiene in order, things happen. You have bad migrations. Sometimes, we talked about this earlier, private equity comes in, tool's not what it was before. Sometimes things just fall apart. But if you own your data and if you have it, and again, it's not just necessarily own your data, but understand it, where it is, why it's there, where it needs to go, and what do you do if it's not there. So I'd say that's probably the best advice I can give.
Great. Thank you so much. This is very insightful, some great tips from all of you. I want to thank our guests again, Matt Rose, Roman Shraga, and Oli Thordarson. And I want to encourage all our listeners to check out mspsuccess.com on the regular. Every day we're posting news and video and features that are designed to keep you up to date on what's happening in the channel, as well as provide some business building advice to grow and scale your business. So thank you once again, and we will catch you at the next MSP Roundtable.